Hello and welcome. Today we're going to cover the passive voice in your writing and why you should generally avoid it. Please take notes today as you're going to be required to change some passive sentences into active sentences for the quiz that's directly following this lecture. The passive voice, in general, is a sentence where the subject is either obscured because it's placed at the end or it's just simply not there. Passive sentences can lead to wordy sentences, they can lead to a lack of clarity in your writing, and in general, I encourage you not to use them. And I'll talk about exceptions to that rule as we move forward. Here's the textbook definition of the passive voice. It occurs when you make the object of an action into the subject of a sentence, and therefore it causes the obscure subject of the sentence. The formula for identifying a passive construction, usually what I would see in a sentence is some form of the to-be verbs, which here's a list right here. The most common ones are am, is, and was, plus a past participle. So past participles are essentially the ed version of the verbs. Looked, talked, worked are all examples of the past participle. So usually when I see these two combined together, that is a passive construction, a passive sentence. So we're going to do some practice, and I'm going to give you the steps for making a passive sentence into an active sentence. Write these down. It's going to help you with the assignment that's directly following this lecture. So we're going to work with a really simple example. The apples were eaten. We know that this is a passive sentence because it's a form of the to-be verb, which is were, and then the past participle of the word eat or ate. So the apples were eaten. Step one is that you identify the subject. In this sentence, there's no subject. We do not know who ate the apples. A good way of knowing what the subject is the subject is what does the verb, if that makes sense. It is what does the action of the verb. So in this case, we don't know who's eating the apples. And so if you do not know what the subject is, if there's no subject in the sentence, then you add one in. So again, step one is to identify the subject. Step two is if there's no subject, you add one in. So I went ahead and added in Huxley, which is my daughter's name, just for fun. So the apples were eaten by Huxley, added her into the end. After you add the subject in, you move the subject to the beginning. So I moved Huxley to the beginning, and then I had to change the past participle to the present, and it turns into Huxley ate the apples. So after you move the subject to the beginning, you also eliminate the to-be verbs, and you can tell that I took that out. Change the tenses as necessary. So let me walk you through these steps one more time. Step one, identify the subject. Step two, if there's no subject, add one in. Step three, you move the subject to the beginning and eliminate the to-be verbs. And step four, change the tenses as necessary. So as I kind of hinted at earlier, there are a number of problems that are associated with using the passive voice in your writing. When you use the passive voice, a lot of the times you're using vague or abstract subjects and weak verbs, and so the writing itself is not strong. Additionally, passive voice can lead to a lack of clarity, as I mentioned. So in this case, in the event of additional hotel accommodation being required over and above that which has been booked, this should be done by telephoning the travel team. This language was directly taken from a hotel website, I believe. So in this case, the website purposefully uses a passive voice to obscure the meaning. So you'll notice this a lot of the times with legal jargon or with kind of shady organizations, is that the more convoluted the language, the more likely you can be duped. So using the passive voice can be a tool for them, and understanding that it is a tool for unethical corporations can help you identify what it is that's being asked of you. So again, the passive voice can lead to a lack of clarity. Use the active voice so people know what it is that you're saying. And wordiness, as I mentioned. So a surge of power was responsible for the destruction of the equipment. Very wordy. Instead, if you were to make it active and say a surge of power destroyed the equipment, voila, it sounds so much better and there's way fewer words. There are certain situations where the passive voice is useful in writing. I teach tech writing as some of my other classes, and in tech writing, sometimes it is, in scientific writing, sometimes it is useful to use the passive voice. There are two specific scenarios where you would use it. The first scenario is when the actor is not really important, but the process or principle being described is. So, an example of that is in a lab report, you wouldn't say, I poured 20 cc of acid into the beaker. Instead, you would say 20 cc of acid was poured into the beaker. Passive voice, but again, it doesn't matter who's doing the pouring. What matters is the details. And this kind of says the same thing, but you would also use the passive when the details of the process are much more important than anyone's taking responsibility for the action. So in instruction writing, you'd say something like the first coat of primer paint is applied immediately after the acid rinse. That works. You wouldn't want to say, again, I applied the first coat of primer, because it doesn't matter who's applying it. It matters that that's what you're doing. In your papers, in your research papers, I do want you to use the active voice, if at all possible, or when possible, and that will be on your rubric. If you have a question about whether or not a sentence should be passive or active, email me, but err on the side of writing all of your sentences in the active voice. So for example, if you were to write, research was conducted because of the interest in this topic, I'm not sure who's conducting the research and who is interested in the topic. Instead, you can say, I conducted research on this topic to explore my interest in this, that, or the other. And that's another point that I do want to make. It's totally fine and encouraged for you to use the word I in your papers. It becomes problematic when you overly rely on using I and it becomes anecdotal, but it's fine for you to sprinkle it in throughout the report. There is a person behind writing this research report. There is a reason why you're writing it. So I'm totally fine with you including the word I. That is all that I have for you today. Please let me know if you have any questions, and be sure to complete the passive exercise due tonight by 8 p.m.